So Garry, Stijn and Emma, great to have you together. We've got representatives from three biggest data center markets right here on Zoom, which is really good to show that, you know, at a time like this, at a difficult time like this, people are still working together and collaborating. So thank you for that. Really appreciate it. I suppose just trying to kick off maybe just on a personal level, we are faced with the greatest crisis in a very long time. I don't know why I'm smiling. It's probably not something to be smiling about. It's the greatest crisis, you know, probably since World War II. And how are you guys coping with that, just on a personal level? How are you finding it? Emma, maybe we'll start with you.
Okay, I was really surprised how little my life has changed, because I already work remotely. And
Yeah.
So in fact, and it's been incredibly busy. So it's just been flat out really for the last 3 weeks. It kicked off sort of 9th-ish March, really fully kicked off on the 16th. So it's been absolutely flat out since then. And I've, you know, we've got out in the evenings. I've missed the socialising. I think in our household, our son is the one who's, you know, struggling the most, because of course he's sitting here with two parents who are working all the time and no friends to see. So
Yeah.
my point of view, to be honest, I've got plenty on. I haven't got time to think about very much outside daily getting through the job list. But yeah, very aware of other family members and external ones. So I think the worry radar has changed in terms of what's on it and how high up they are.
And I fair play, because I find through this, just being able to focus on something for a long time, I find quite difficult, because I keep getting distracted. Stijn, how about yourself?
It has been very busy, and our first focus as an industry, of course, was to continue and to be able to continue. So there was a lot of communication about how on common practices, how should we react, how should we lower risks to continue our services. It's been very busy as a trade association. Well, as a fairly new trade association, still that everybody can find us is I think is positive, and that we are able to do positive things for the industry is very I think good as an organization. Yeah, personally, it's of course we start off the day as our organization with everybody in our organization. So every 9 o'clock we have our call, and it's the first 50 minutes, it's about nothing related to work, just to also keep up the spirit and to have that interaction that you so miss now that everybody is working at home. It's a little bit difficult to adapt to, but in a way we have been able to continue to work. It's been very busy, and I expect that it will be busy for quite some while now, now that everybody knows the real important value of data centers.
I love that you're spending so much time focused on communication that isn't necessarily work related, but, you know, is powered through a data center, you know, ironically, but, you know, keeping up that communication is so important, because, you know, even at the best of times, we're not always great at communication internally. So it's good to hear. Yeah. And Garry, how about you?
It's fascinating, the reaction of different people to crisis, and it brings out the best and the worst in a lot of people. And I think so far, I've been really surprised at how much good it's brought out in people. As Stijn and Emma said, the desire to connect with people and not just dive into the project plan straight away. The desire not just to talk about programs and costs and say, how are you getting on? It's really quite refreshing, because I thought I was starting to be one of the last old fogies that actually gave people hugs and asked them how's the crack and what's going on. But I think deep down people are that's still there. I have no concerns, personal concerns right now. I'm surrounded by my kids and my wife and my in-laws, etc., all fine. But that being mindful that there's a whole community of people that are fearful, are scared, uncertainty. But you know, I'm delighted to say that the last 15 years we've been part of building an industry that probably has been misunderstood with it to a great degree, misaligned, and now if it wasn't for the tools and services or the crutches, we wouldn't be having this call, and the frontline workers wouldn't be getting the information they need. So I think it's if it had happened 10 years ago, I think the world would have been an awful lot worse.
Yeah, absolutely different scenario. Yeah.
Working from home with a fax machine and a telephone would have been quite different.
Yeah, and a dial-up. The start of every day. Can you imagine? And actually, on that, I suppose, are you seeing a change in the debate around data centers? Data centers don't always get the most positive PR. You know, it's something that, you know, we're always trying to educate, and there's some great information out there. In particular, some of the stuff that you've put out, Emma, is just fantastic. It's so relatable, and it makes everyone understands the real purpose of data centers. And I think this scenario is helping to amplify that, I think. What are you guys seeing in your country?
From my perspective, we've had a complete step change. So we've always struggled a bit with the relationship of the data center sector as to whether it is or is not part of sort of critical national infrastructure. The way that critical national infrastructure is dealt with is perhaps a bit out of date. And so when this started sort of fairly early on in March, we got in touch with DCMS, which is our Department for Culture, Media and Sport, and said, you know, we're concerned about we're concerned about sort of key worker. We're concerned about this. This is what the sector does, and they were really good. Actually, they responded immediately. They've actually set up a specialist dedicated data infrastructure team to ensure we have, you know, they can help us the sector to be resilient. They put data infrastructure explicitly on the key workers list, and that was, you know, within about 36 hours of us asking, which is incredible. As you know, all of us know, deal with government, that is incredibly fast.
Yeah.
And they've been working really closely with us since then. I've got a huge mountain of questions I'm working through for them. So I have to say, yeah, complete change in the UK in terms of how we're seen, certainly within the policy landscape. I haven't had time to look at external stakeholders and what they think, but certainly from the government point of view, yes.
Was there something, you know, and it probably just goes without saying, in Harry's point, you know, if this was 10 years ago, I think it would have been a very different scenario, and people wouldn't have seen so easily, you know, the benefits of data and how that's moving and processing and keeping people connected. But was there something, like, was it a difficult, I know you said it was quite fast, but did you have to put up an argument, or was it just quite simple? They saw it straight away, like, clearly we need this.
We put in the arguments, yes. So I would say there was fervent lobbying from us, and then there was also very fervent internal advocacy within government by DCMS to, you know, Cabinet Office and those parts of government on our behalf. But yes, so I put together a dossier, I put together a position statement about the sector, and that kind of stuff. And I think what's been interesting is that people sort of associate stuff that isn't maybe considered that important, you know, social media and people uploading videos of themselves teaching their dogs to tap dance, my favorite example. Those kind of things are associated with data centers, and people kind of forgotten that actually the entire economy is underpinned by data centers. So it's a really useful reminder to say, actually, you know, government, if you want to send out communications about COVID-19, how do you think they're going to get out? How do you think you're going to put them together? Where they're going to sit? If you want supermarkets to restock, if you want logistics to work, if you want healthcare, you know, data to be sorted, you know, that's all got to be done there. And I think that certainly the penny had already dropped in certain circumstances, in certain areas, but I think it's, you know, the cogs really turned. So that's very pleasing.
Great. And how about you, Stijn? Have you seen similar in the Netherlands?
the main change is the awareness that people are having, that all of a sudden they have to work from home, they have to rely on their online services. Luckily, I think the many companies already have systems in place, already worked from home. It went rather smoothly. To be honest, we also had the first 2 weeks we were very busy as an industry as a whole, from cloud to networks to get it all connected. For instance, many schools didn't have enough laptops for the children, for the students. Systems had to be upgraded. To be honest, it went really without that much of real downtime. So that was, I think, really impressive. And I think the awareness was also that people became really aware that this is quite a robust infrastructure. They have been really impressive on how this industry is coping, and the awareness has grown tremendously in the last couple of weeks. So I think that's really positive. And people, of course, we are in it for only a couple of weeks. We cannot already comment on real fundamental changes, but when talking to politicians or to government workers, they already have a real different tone of voice than before. Our primary concern is to keep everything running, but to the future, I think this is a good change.
Yeah, and Garry, how about you? What have you seen?
Yeah, I think there's two sides to it for us. Obviously, data centers and the value of the data in the centers is very much part of our foreign direct investment story. So when you consider that all the physical factories are closed, the virtual factories are still open. They're still producing products and services and exporting them, monetizing those. So that helps the discussion when you're talking to policymakers, because that basically is a lot of income and revenue, both being exported from Ireland, being monetized. And the first thing was to demonstrate, it was great to have all those relevant numbers, because then there was no question of the data center people being recognized as essential workers. So therefore that was key. Whatever about new projects that are obviously on a slow, the existing projects, getting the workers and the associated sub-supply workers recognized as essential workers was done in advance of the lockdown. So that was wonderful, I think, from the point of view of getting a surety that we could, to Stijn's words, make sure that it didn't fall over once we got it going. The second thing then, so that's more policy. The second thing which was interesting was I was on national radio last Friday, and normally when I'm on any form of national radio, the first question is, you should be ashamed of yourself using all this electricity. That's nearly the narrative. Whereas this time it was more along the lines of, wow, if it wasn't for you, this radio station couldn't be operating. If it wasn't for you and your infrastructure, we couldn't broadcast this all over the world for listeners to listen to. So that just by the first question, I got a little sense that the value of the infrastructure, whilst it still may not be understood, its value is now being realized. And you know, I don't think the industry, I think Emma and Stijn, we've spoken about this before, collectively the industry isn't very good at communicating what it does anyway, because critical infrastructure people love to talk for hours about PUE and all this type of stuff, when in actual fact the consumer, if this was an analogy of a car, he wants to smell the leather and he wants to know of the driving experience. He really doesn't care that much about the spark plug, really. So now it's got that across in a different way. And I think that it will change the discussion at least, and it'll be less hostility, but we still have to continue on the path that all of us have stated on numerous occasions is the right path, which is to use the little of the natural resources we have and optimize that to maximize the availability of the data.
And actually on that, just in terms of, I suppose, the status at the moment of data centers in your respective countries, how is daily life, daily work, and the industry itself, how has that been impacted? I know you've touched on it a little bit, but, you know, are things just business as usual? People are getting to work, you know, all around the industry, and it's all very smooth, or are there still kind of some challenges or some stops or some slowdowns that you're seeing?
I can probably answer that from the UK's perspective. So what's tended to happen is that the operators have got to carefully balance routes for infection against so a number of, I think most of them now are restricting customer access to sites, which means that customer visits are down to sort of critical work or you know, essential upgrades, that kind of thing. But the corollary to that is, of course, that they have to provide then a lot more smart hands, smart eyes, that kind of stuff. So in fact, there's a lot more internal activity and more pressure on the actual operator staff to provide those services so that they can limit the overall footfall, which is, you know, what we need to be doing. So that's one thing that we're seeing: increased internal activity, reduced customer footprint. The other thing, obviously, and Garry will probably be able to comment better on this, is the construction sites, where we've seen a very wide variation in what's happening in terms of footfall and activity. So some sites are continuing pretty much as normal, doing really well. Other sites, they've had an infection and the site's actually closed down temporarily, and they will then restart again. And then there's a sort of third category where sites are starting to run up against either, you know, subcontractors or subcontractors of subcontractors, or supply chain issues, often for really obscure things that you can, you know, small things you can usually always get hold of. So those are things we're seeing. Very varied picture within the construction industry, but I think time will tell, and I think a number of those projects will start having to manage supply chain issues as time goes on.
Yeah, we see that the same way. I think if you look at the visits to data centers have gone to around 30% of what they have used to be. So a lot of smart hand activity, data centers doing it for their customers. Yeah, some restrictive measures. So that's the change there in terms of the building. And I have to say the Netherlands has an intelligent lockdown. So there isn't really a lockdown, but everybody has to, work at home if we can. But in terms of construction, there have been regulations between the government or agreements between the government and the building societies that we can continue. The real issues that we're seeing is like if this takes longer, that we, especially with the expertise, that there's a lot of international expertise coming in. There we see some bottlenecks, and we see some bottlenecks in terms of the supply of equipment. That in some countries factories have been shut down or are shut down, that there will be some challenges in the supply chain.
All the people building your data centers are here in Dublin.
Yeah, well, not all, but a lot are.
I couldn't let that one go, my friend. I couldn't let it go. But I think you're right. I think both of you have covered the two things. The operational data centers, you must have the health and safety of your own workers has to be paramount, and each one of us has the same clients: Equinix, Interaction, Digital Realty. So they've got a global policy on how they want to restrict access to clients and stuff. On the new sites, Ireland has taken a very black and white view. All construction sites are closed, irrespective of asset class. Wow. We have taken the view from the World Health Authority and the Irish HSE that social separation on site is impossible when you've got electricians with mechanical, with builders and stuff. And also it's unfair and unreasonable to expect a guy that's working on a pharmaceutical site to be off looking after his family, and a guy that's just working on a data center happens to be asked to go and put his life on the line, potentially. So the decision was made, all sites are officially locked down as of last Monday. That was widely appreciated by the industry, And it was very interesting, the reaction of some of the clients, however, at this moment in time, only essential workers are for operating data centers, keeping the tills running, keeping the health and safety paramount, all construction sites bar anything that's specific to the COVID-19 pandemic, i.e. Temporary hospitals, fortunately morgues, test centers, all of that stuff, obviously construction, but data centers in the, out of the ground and stuff, that's all stuff.
Well, thank you for that. And I think just before we finish up, maybe just on a personal note, I would love to know, can you give me one thing that you do every day, or what's the one thing in your life that helps you get through the days with your sanity? I need some tips.
I have slightly off the wall projects going on. So there's one thing that we go out for a walk as a family every day in the evening, which is quite nice. But actually, the thing that really keeps me sane is having a project so that afterwards I can look back and say, oh, during that COVID-19 thing, I did that. So my first project has been building a social distance compliant chess set in the garden from found objects. I'll send you a picture, Garry, you'll like it.
Wow.
So that's
I wouldn't expect anything.
I know, I'm like,
my next project, so that project's done. My next project, and they continue because you go and chip away at them each day. I'm not very good at this kind of thing. It took me a bit longer than I thought it would take me. And my next project, I'm building a smokehouse out of, again, found objects. And I have to say, my house is full of rubbish. So it's actually, it's ideal. And then I can sort of look like, oh, well, I did build my smokehouse. So it's about having something concrete you can look back to. And if you can't do that, then finding something in the day that you've completed that you can tick off something. And sometimes I'm just moving an annoying broken flower pot that's annoyed me for the last 6 months, but I've never moved. And then that's my thing where I've moved stuff forward for a day. So that's a bit long-winded, but that was my thing.
No, I think that was brilliant. And I'm just kind of going, God love you, Stijn and Garry, because now you have to follow that.
Well, for us, it's gardening. We've been living in this house for 2.5 years, and we have done the whole sort of like house thing now, and now it's sort of like time for the garden. So we, and especially now the last week has been really nice weather. So we, after an hour of call, we walk outside, and at lunch, if it's possible, we lunch in the gardens and take on projects there, and try to really help sort of like our work during the weekends fully there to get away from the screen and the telephone that we're constantly on.
Of course, that wonderful beard that you're growing there, my friend. That looks pretty good.
Yeah, I have a Corona beard also.
Beard 19.
I like it. I think I've two things. I have a young daughter who's learning to drive, and it's the most wonderful time to teach somebody to drive when there's no other cars on the road. But also, I mentioned before music, so I'm back playing the guitar. I have my guitar beside me, and I actually now really, I have Spotify here, and I found that it's been wonderful for bringing me back. Spotify I've had for a long time, but it connects you with different genre, and it gives great memories, memories, and they're like silk scarves around you. They're wonderful memories. And then I decided one of the songs that was played, I used to play on the guitar, and I said, I'm going to take the guitar back out. So I might be back. All of our calls now, Michelle, in the future I'm going to be serenading us.
Sounds amazing. And I think, to Emma's point, and, taking on a specific project, Garry, your new project now is to create a jingle for Host in Ireland.
I have to work out how to replay it first, though. And are there any 4-letter words allowed in the jingle?
No.
As many as you want.
We've been very good. We've been way better at this call with 4-letter words. Well, I have, then no.
Data. It's amazing.
Yeah.
Well, look, thank you so much. It's an absolute pleasure to have the three of you on, and again, just having the three biggest markets coming on, chatting, collaborating, in good times and bad times. It's been a real pleasure. So thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very
Thank
much.
you. Thank you.